Okay, hello. It is a pleasure to see, well, at least virtually see all of you. And as they said, we're not magicians. Well, I don't even think we can pretend to be magicians, but we can certainly help think through um, how your organizations can be ready from a future perspective, right? How to think about it and how you can assess your future readiness. Joining me today is Howard Spode, who's an independent consultant who helps organizations decide on, implement, and where necessary, fix initiatives to transform business support services in HR, right? He's worked in this a little over 25 years. He doesn't look it. And as a client, supplier, and intermediary. And very familiar with every stage of the life cycle and is an expert in putting together an approach and an idea for your organization. So please join me in welcoming Howard Spode on stage. Howard?
Hey Guhan, how are you
Hi,
doing?
Howard. Excellent. How are you?
I'm very well.
Yeah. We
Hello.
seem to have remarkably similar views of the office.
It
Have
looks
you
like it.
noticed that?
Which floor are you on?
Oh, a few floors away, I think, or at least a few flights away. No, kidding. Pleasure to see you, Howard. Thank you so much for joining us. And if you're ready, let's get this started. All right. So let me set the context by setting up the objectives for what we want to do in the next 50 or so minutes, right? This is, by way of a quick reminder, this is the first of the two sessions that we're going to have on the future readiness. So today, our entire focus for the entire session is going to be on three things. One, to give you a simple logic, right, for determining whether there is a case for HR transformation, right? Most organizations tend to think about HR transformation in fairly grandiose terms, and it's big, it's complex, but the story begins a little before that, right? Is there a business case? And that is a very important question to ask, because for you to be future ready, is there a business case for that, right? And that is one of the core focus areas. We want to be able to give you a simple logic to be able to get to that decision. Second, all along, you'll see that we will be sharing examples and a lot of experience-based suggestions and tips from our own experience of working with different customers, different areas. We want to make this as practical and as hands-on as possible, right? It's not dense consulting type stuff. It's very practical, day-to-day things that you can actually use and take away from. Third, we want to be able to give you an opportunity to undertake a high level assessment. Okay? So it's not just all fluff. We want to be able to give you a tool that will help you take an assessment and sort of help you figure out how ready your organization is and where you are in a spectrum. And then we'll walk you through the next steps to get there. Okay? So if that sounds exciting, we will get started. Let me begin by asking Howard. Howard, perhaps you can start us off.
Yep, thanks Guhan. Hello everybody, it's a pleasure to be here. We're going to share a 6-step process. 2 of the steps we'll share today and the other 4 tomorrow. But even before I share the process, let's focus a little bit on the question, is there a business case? And to me, I refer to the business case equation. And in short, and we're going to explore it on this slide, in short, it's whether the benefits of transformation outweigh the downsides of transformation enough to justify the change. So let's look at the different components of that equation, yeah? If you could bring in the benefits, Guhan. Thanks very much. So almost all HR transformations involve one or more of these benefits. And the way I've set this diagram up is towards the center of these concentric hexagons, the more tangible the benefit is. Towards the outside, the green gets lighter and the less tangible the benefit is. That does not mean at all that the benefit is less important. It's just less measurable in traditional terms. So right at the heart there is cost. What I mean by this, cost savings is the most tangible and measurable benefit of HR transformation. Yes, cost visibility or cost predictability, but the most tangible is we want to make cost savings. That being the running costs of the future transform model are less than the as-is situation. Okay, we move then to quality. Some parts of quality are very tangible. You can measure payroll accuracy very well. You can measure payroll timeliness. You can measure recruitment time, cycle time. You can also measure how many people leave the organization within the difficult induction period, 3 to 6 months after they're hired. You can measure these things. And these are all quality metrics. Other aspects of quality are less easy to measure and be becoming a bit more intangible, but no less important. Customer service, for example. What do HR's customers think of their service they receive from HR? That's potentially measurable, but I think we'd all agree it's less tangible. Yeah, you can have customer surveys and things like that. Do we measure the quality of an HR BP's interaction with the management team that HR BP is assigned to? Not often. Less tangible, but no less important. Then we get to risk management. What I mean by this is the removal of risks in the current situation. Risk of an unstable situation, unstable technology, for example, an unstable system, or a small payroll department, 5 people in it. 2 we know are going to retire in the next couple of years. One's already said they want to move to a different department in the organization, maybe into Comp and Ben Center of Excellence or something like that. And one's just resigned. So all of a sudden we have a big problem. We have a big risk around skills retention. And we might want to do something about that, possibly along the lines of outsourcing the payroll in this particular instance. And if we did, we wouldn't worry too much about cost. Might even be prepared for the cost to go up a bit. We want the quality to be at least as good as it is, but the main driver would be, let's manage this risk. And finally, other. There's 1 or 2 other things that appear in HR transformation benefits cases. Organizational flexibility, for example, or organizational agility. For example, the ability to plug and play with acquisitions and bring them into a common back office setup. Okay, so those are the benefits. All sounds great, but there are also some negatives. Thanks, Guhan. And negatives to me fall in 2 categories: bad things that will happen and bad things that may happen. So downsides are bad things that will happen. For example, investment. A change costs money. There's no way around it. There are ways of dealing with this. Perhaps a supplier, an outsourcing supplier, would be willing to amortize. That means to spread out the cost of the investment over the life of the deal and add it to the operational cost. But it's still a cost, yeah? And an outsourcing supplier can't amortize all the costs anyway. Another bad thing that will happen to some extent or other is people displacement. Even if we take that payroll deal again, that 5-person payroll deal, even if the outsourcer took over in situ on the client's premises, or even if the outsourcer's center happened to be within about 5 or 10 kilometers of where the people currently were, and the people actually joined the outsourcer, they transferred their employment, it's still a profound change in their lives. But let's face it, usually major HR transformation involves jobs being moved out, lost or moved elsewhere. And that means people have to be redeployed elsewhere in the organization, or more likely made redundant, unfortunately. So that's a bad thing that will happen. In terms of risk, there might be service disruption, there might be impact on PR, even external PR, there might be resistance, change resistance. Okay, if we can just complete the diagram, Guhan. So as I said, it's an equation. And I've drawn the greens bigger than the reds. As I said, if the greens aren't significantly bigger than the reds, there is no business case, because the greens have to be bigger enough than the reds to justify the change, the cost and the additional risks of the change. In purely financial terms, this is called an investment appraisal. So the to-be costs, yes, they're great. They're less than the as-is costs, but they're not less enough to justify the investment. That's why organizations have investment appraisal criteria. Yeah? When I say equation, and I've just used a financial example, this is holistic. So let me stress it, business cases are holistic, and this will come through in the course of this presentation, in this session, yeah? It's not just about cost. The financial model is almost invariably an important part, a key part of the business case. It is not a synonym for business case. The business case is much wider than the financial model and is holistic. One other thing, a couple of other things on this slide. So yes, we know it's a decision. HR transformation isn't right for everybody. For example, HR could choose a new grading system, yeah, or leadership training when an organization needs to change its culture. This is not HR transformation. This is HR delivering transformative interventions into the organization. This is not HR transforming itself. And here comes another risk. HR transformation always brings this risk, and it has to be managed. HR transformation is fundamentally HR focusing on HR. Sometimes it has to be done for the greater good and to equip oneself for the future, because there are problems in the current as-is situation that have to be resolved, yeah? But there's always a risk that HR transformation is HR changing HR. I think that's as much as I want to say on that slide. Guhan, I don't know if you want to add anything, or you're happy for me to go on?
Absolutely, Howard. I think you explained the big question, right? And articulated it really well. Let's move on.
Okay, everybody, here's the 6-step process we promised. The first step, I'm going to explain each one of these in turn, by the way. And as I said before, we'll do the first 2 today and the other 4 tomorrow. So the first step, this is just a summary for now, is the strategic context. What's the organization trying to do? How does that flow through to HR? And how does that drive the need for HR transformation? The next step, when the strategic context is clear, is let's analyze our current situation. Let's take a critical analysis of ourselves against that strategic context. And here, by the way, at the back end of this session, Guhan's going to introduce you to the tool he mentioned, the tool that Neeyamo have developed, which is, I've seen it, I've gone through it. It's a very handy way of taking the first steps into looking at oneself as an HR organization. The next step in the journey is the need for change. Again, we'll explore each of these steps in more detail. This is not the solution, by the way, not jumping ahead to the solution. This is the specification for the solution, the parameters that any possible future world must adhere to. And it's driven directly from the strategic context and a critical analysis of where we are. From that flows a need for something different that has these features. The next step, please, Guhan. Thanks very much. When we know the need for change, we can start to review the possibilities, what's available to us. What's available to us to make ourselves better? What's out there in the external world? What's even out there in the internal world, by the way? Lots of good practices in large organizations, but in small parts of large organizations. Yeah, so best practices, trends, etc. The next step is we put together a blueprint for the to-be world, the future situation. And we cover certain components in that blueprint. Because we won't be covering this particular session today, I'll just say what the 3 components are. How things would work, I call that the operational solution. Who'd be responsible for what, I call that the commercial solution. And how would we get there? I call that the implementation solution. So we'll explore those three components when we get to this step tomorrow. And finally, when you've got all that, you know the strategic context, you've done the, you know your as-is situation, the strengths and weaknesses, you've pinpointed a need for change, you've seen what's out there and available, leading edge, not bleeding edge. You've created your blueprint. You can now put all that together to generate conclusions and recommendations, clear conclusions, whether there's a business case or not. And if there is, what should the next steps be? Okay, let's move forward then into the first of those 6 steps. Strategic context. Now, to me, there are 3 main drivers here: corporate strategy, and I don't mean this to just cover commercial organizations, by the way. It's the best terminology I could think of to cover all types of organizations, and I hope that's okay. But I certainly don't just mean it to cover commercial organizations. It's the overall strategy of the organization. Then we have HR strategy, and part of me wishes I'd call this people strategy, because this is about the strategy for people in the organization. It's usually termed HR strategy, but it's not inwardly focused towards HR. That's a part of it. It's how we manage, deal with, make best use of talent in this organization. That's people or HR strategy. And then sourcing strategy. Let me explain a bit about the relationship between these 3. For example, you get an organization that's traditionally been it's been dominant in its mature markets. But for some reason or other, these markets have been disrupted, possibly by radically different customer behavior requirements, the internet, etc. So new entrants are in the market attacking this traditionally dominant player. Now, this may, in our hypothetical example, this may lead the organization as part of its corporate strategy to say we need to be more entrepreneurial. Okay, what does that mean? Sounds good. Pushing decision-making down, lower down in the organization. We want our managers at the coalface, or whatever the best terminology is, to be making decisions and be empowered to make those decisions so that we as an organization can react quicker and better, closer to the customer. Okay, this is all good. What does it mean back to HR strategy? I'm sure all the people in the audience are thinking examples of how the ramifications for HR. I'll just give a couple. Changing the performance management systems, for example, to reward risk-taking as long as it's not excessive and outlandish, and not to punish people who take risks where they don't come off, because sometimes risks won't come off, even though they're well thought through actions. Changing leadership behavior, for example. Changing the culture of the organization. So those are ramifications of that corporate strategy for HR strategy. I hope that's pretty clear. Some organizations have sourcing strategy. What do I mean by this? Principles for make or buy that they apply across their business, from manufacturing to marketing, including HR. Should we make or should we buy? What sort of things should we make for ourselves, and what sort of things should we buy? Some large organizations have sourcing strategy. Some don't. Where sourcing strategy does exist, of course, it has to be taken into account in developing HR strategy. I hope that's clear. Guhan, you deal with a lot of actual and potential Neeyamo clients. How often do you come across a clear, formal people or HR strategy that's linked to corporate strategy?
Howard, surprisingly, a lot less often than I would think, right? People have a very clear picture of what they want to do from an HR perspective, or how they want to be able to deliver the services. But by way of articulating that as an HR strategy, right? And tie that in nicely with their corporate strategy in terms of a vision or a mantra, if you will. That's perhaps, even if it's created inside the organization, it's not very public, right? So I think that being able to create that vision And being able to define that strategy is going to be very, very critical. I've seen some companies do that really well, and they've blended that very nicely into the ethos of who they are. And the others haven't really articulated it, but are still doing a great job.
Thanks, Guhan. That ties in with my own experience. By the way, I think the more HR departments have an HR strategy than finance departments have a finance strategy, because finance, what we do is obvious, no? No, so I also help people with finance transformation as well, and they're in the same boat. They have to articulate their strategy and what's finance for in the light of corporate strategy. Anyway, the good news is that as part of developing a business case for HR transformation, if you could just reveal the next bullet, Guhan. Thanks. Yeah, as part of developing the business case, we can, and indeed should, reverse engineer the HR strategy. We need that piece if you're going to develop if you're going to ascertain whether there's a business case for HR transformation. You need the HR strategy piece, and you need to know how it's linked to corporate strategy. And it can be reverse engineered relatively quickly. So here's an example. Now, this example is plucked from a larger report, the summary of a business case investigation project. So when it's shown on its own, it looks rather orphaned. But if you can imagine it as part of 15 or 20 slides, one of which was their interpretation, the HR team's interpretation of corporate strategy, and this one was their interpretation of HR strategy. They didn't have one before, but we sat round a whiteboard and we did it. Now, I'm not claiming, and nor would they, that it's the most detailed, rigorous HR people strategy in the world, but it's served the purpose. It gave the context, and they never had it before, and they were very happy with it. And it took about a 2 or 3 hour workshop. Yeah. Not just to generate it, but then to tailor it. They were happy with it, and it served its purpose. So that's the good news. As part of doing a business case for HR transformation, you can reverse engineer HR strategy. Let us move on. As analysis of as is the next step, if you remember. Oh yes, could you just, is it possible to just take that away for a second, Guhan? Thanks ever so much. I've noticed a couple of questions coming in, but I can't, of course, do two things at once because I'm a man. Yeah. So I wonder, Guhan, if you can say how we intend to answer questions.
A couple of things, Howard. What I'm going to do is I've been looking at the questions that are coming in, and a lot of them are pretty interesting. So perhaps you can finish the analysis of the as-is, and before we go into the next part, we'll take a few questions, or we will do them in the speaker lounge, right? So we can take a lot of these questions in the speaker lounge as well. So I will try and pick these questions that relate to what we're talking about right away, but we will address all of these questions in the speaker lounge just after this session. And for everybody in the audience, the link to the speaker lounge will be right below where the event is. It'll be in the live Q&A, or you'll see that link available there. So you can just click and join us in the speaker lounge to ask and get answers to these questions as well.
Thanks ever so much, Guhan. Okay, everybody, analysis of as is. If you remember, we've got the strategic context now. So now we critically look at ourselves. I usually have a checklist for this. If you could bring it up there, Guhan. I should say something else as well. You can do a business case. You can think through whether there might be a business case for HR transformation in an hour in your head. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. That's the first step. That's how the people develop their thinking, yeah? Or you could do it in a half day or a day workshop with your team by going through these steps. At the end, if you want to do, at the end of the second session, we'll explain, Guhan and I will explain that if you wanted to do a formal business case investigation project, it normally takes about 12 weeks. So a lot of the flavor of what I'm talking about and the examples I give about are the outputs of an 8 to 12 week formal project. Nevertheless, this logic flow works at any level. All right. and an analysis of an as-is checklist. What, why, how many, how well, and how much. You might do that by questionnaires, desk research, structured interviews, all three, whatever. But let me take you through each. What? That's a simple, what do you do? What services does the HR department deliver? And a definition of them. So a list and a definition. Why is, what's the value of these services? And the use of doing that is you might come back to that later in the blueprint for the future, because I'm pretty sure we all know that HR delivers some services that don't have value, and they don't deliver some other services that could have a lot of value. So we'll document that as well. Then how? In rapid but robust terms, if it's an 8 or 12 week project, let's describe how in terms of process, technology, the people who do the work, the way they're organized, the physical infrastructure and the commercial infrastructure. By that, I mean, are things bought on an ad hoc basis? Is there an element of outsourcing? Is it all done in-house? So how? A description of how. How many? These are the volumetrics. In some parts of, so the measures of volumes. In some parts of HR, these already should be being reported and probably are. Even if they're not reported, they're easy to get at. Payroll, for example, the number of pay slips is easy to get at. You've got 2,000 people in your organization that are paid twice weekly. That's a number. And then you add the off cycles and the special pay slips. So other HR admin as well, how many contracts are set up, changed, finished. It's relatively easy to get at, yeah? Other volumetrics, more difficult to get at. How often does an HRBP interact with the managers, and what kind of interaction? Okay, volumetrics. Quality metrics tend to be even thinner on the ground. Yeah. Quality metrics, again, in payroll, they're there, they're available. Payroll timeliness, payroll accuracy. Those are the two key ones. How many off-cycle runs are there? I mean, there's three key ones, yeah. In HR admin, a little bit more difficult. How many days did it take us to enter that new contract in the new starter in the system, etc., etc. And as we go into other areas of HR, it becomes less tangible again, as we said before, and it's more a question of customer service rather than hard quality metrics. But they can be got. And finally, the cost. The costs have to be collected, yeah, because a financial model is always going to be part of the business case. A financial model doesn't have to be scary, but it does have to be there. You might need a finance person to help you. Yeah, the as-is analysis is an area where I said a phrase a second ago: rapid but robust. We need to be rapid, because life is rapid, especially these days, but we need to be robust. Now, I've seen business cases that are rapid but not robust. Yeah, believe me, I've seen major HR transformations that 2 years in start to try and retrospectively justify what they're doing because the pressure's on. And pressure often does come on in HR transformation, yeah? You come across sticky patches, and you don't want to be frantically trying to work out some numbers or some rationale and that should have been done at the outset and signed up to by all the relevant stakeholders. So I've seen them rapid but not robust. I've also seen them extremely robust, meaninglessly so, and not rapid. For example, more than $1 million spent on mapping all as-is processes. That was great for the management consultancy that was engaged to do it. You know, it got about 50 consultants off the bench that wouldn't be used otherwise. There's no need to do that. Yeah? Anyway, rapid but robust. Could we bring in the next bullet? Thanks ever so much, Guhan. It might have come through what I've said already, but it will soon come through when we show the examples on the next slide. We start with facts. We have to get facts. Sometimes they're not easy to get, and we only need to be rapid but robust, but we need some facts. Once we've got facts, we can start to play with them, interpret them, analyze them, model them. Yeah. And finally, we end with opinions. There's absolutely nothing wrong with opinions. HR transformation is going to be led by some people, and they're going to have to lead it, and they're going to have to convince other people who probably don't want to do it. They've got other better things to do, or in their minds they think they have. So it's about leadership, and leadership fundamentally, as well as a rational process, is a psychological, sociological process, yeah? So opinions, bona fide opinions, completely fine. If you go to the next slide, Guhan. Thanks ever so much. A couple of examples. Very simple chart, but very profound one. This is the fully loaded cost per payslip by country business unit in an organization that has about 40 country business units. And it's simply each country, each blue dot is a country with the cost per payslip. You see there's a wide variation. Of course, in real life, we would also map cost per payslip against size of business unit to see if there was a correlation between the smaller countries are the more expensive ones. And we could find that that's the case. In this case, it was partially the case, by the way, but I don't want to go too much into this case study. We'd also map who's outsourced and who's not, and does that make a difference? Anyway, that's too detailed for this particular session. Oh, let me just finish off one thing on this. But even with that chart, now I know the volumes behind each blue circle, how big, how many pay slips, yeah? So I can say that if we moved everything down to the cost per pay slip at the 10th percentile, not the best one, yeah, that's about €2 or €3 per pay slip, but the one at what they call the 10th percentile, so 10% of the range, that organization would save $2 million. Of course, not as easy as that, but it's food for thought. And so we can see we're collecting data. This data had to be collected. It wasn't 100% easy, but then we can start to interpret it. The next example, please, Guhan. Here we have something different. Here we have, it's not, by the way, it's from a different case study. Every example I show is from a different organization. They won't flow from one to the other. That's why they look different. They're in different colors. They might even have different fonts, yeah, from different projects with different companies. So the company on the right, they had a financial model too, and they'd done some financial modeling, but they wanted to summarize their as-is analysis with what are our strengths and what are our weaknesses. And this is what they said. Here we're in qualitative data, the team's opinions, as I said before, absolutely bona fide, absolutely bona fide. So the next step would be, we'll do this tomorrow, the need for change. But out of these things can flow a need for change, yeah? Out of a critical self-analysis in the light of strategic context. So at this point, we're going to stop with, I'm not going to press forward into the other four steps. We're going to do what we promised, which was Guhan's going to introduce this tool as the first steps, a Neeyamo tool as the first steps of self-analysis. However, that was the plan. We might have a few minutes to answer a couple of questions, as Guhan said earlier on. So I'll leave that judgment to you, Guhan. We have, as I make it, we're at 37 minutes past, yeah?
Absolutely. Thank you, Howard. I think one big question in the Q&A that's getting a lot of upvotes is, how can HR leaders overcome the resistance from the C-suite to invest in HR transformation? And that is getting a lot of upvotes. So I think the short answer to that question is by listening to our session. No, I'm kidding. But as Howard pointed out, right? So for you to be able to reason with the C-suite, they are looking at the business holistically, right? And for them, the bottom line or the top line are probably the two most important lines that they look at, right? Because that's what they're measured on, that's what the market rewards them for, and so on. But between those two lines are really the people that are making it happen, right? To be able to press forward and sort of show a business case for transformation, if you start thinking about each of these 6 steps that we're showing you, right? Build the strategic context, right? So what is it that you're looking to achieve? And do an honest assessment, right? And that is exactly the tool that we will be able to walk you through and show you where the organization stands. And most importantly, as we go along, you'll see the tool also helps you show where you can actually go, right? What does full tilt look like? Right? So if you're able to create a succinct picture, as Howard explained, based on facts, interpretation, and therefore opinions to a C-suite, right? Then you're not just taking a business case and putting numbers to it and saying we'll save X, but you're giving it a far more holistic spin, right? So, and then that is really what is key for a business leader to understand, that an HR leader is looking at the business holistically and not just looking between the lines, right? Including the lines. And that, I think, is a good way to approach the C-suite from a resistance perspective. Or what do you think?
No, Guhan, at the risk of fully agreeing with you, I fully agree with you. Yeah, yeah.
That's the risk, Howard. Now, let me walk you through, and we'll take some more of the questions as we go on, right? So let me walk you through the tool that we have put together by working very closely with the Everest Group, right? Which is a global advisory. And when we started thinking about this, very similar to you, right? How should we really think about this? Where should we start? And so we put together a few key elements, right? So we said, well, there's got to be a few key dimensions to how we are thinking about this. Right? So the first is what we call the foundation or the baseline, right? This is sort of ground zero. This is everybody's got to have this, right? How does your data look? What does your technology landscape look like? And how do you think about your own HR talent quality, right? And when you start looking at these three things, data, technology, and your own HR people, then you begin to ask a very different set of, okay, where do we stand on the foundation parameters, right? The second important dimension is to think about digital leverage, right? These days, digital is a highly overused word, but when you think about digital from an HR perspective, how leveraged are you with cloud systems, right? And how are you thinking about self-service portals? How are you dealing with mobile apps? Because your customer, in this case the employee, is probably doing pretty much everything that they're doing today on a mobile phone, right? So is your HR on mobile? And are you using analytics to make decisions, right? Are your decisions data driven, or are they more touchy feely, right? You can't really eliminate the touchy feely from a people decision, but if you back it with analytics, it's going to be materially different, because then it is seen in context for where the gut feel is actually coming from and what the data tells you, right? And how are you thinking about automation and AI in context of HR? A lot of repetitive tasks, can you sort of do away with them, right? Can you automate them? Can you eliminate them, right? And can you create AI to help you think through some of these tasks, so you basically free up time to allow you to think about things that really matter, right? Like from an employee experience perspective and so on. The idea behind technology is really to free your time up. And therefore, it's important to think about how leveraged you are digitally. Um, the third most important aspect is around how you're thinking about your HR operations and governance, right? How standardized and centralized are your processes, right? So, from an HR process perspective, whether you onboard people in China or whether you onboard people in the US, do you have a global framework to sort of think about it? Have you harmonized processes? Are you tracking SLA? Are you able to report back to your business and customers that this is my SLA, this is my metric, this is how I'm measuring it? How are you measuring, or how are you thinking about compliance, right? Every country, every business, every type of business in every country has different compliance requirements. How are you thinking about it, right? Can you confidently say that you've met every compliance in every country? And how are you measuring it? Where is that coming from, right? And when you're thinking about business results, if you think about your customers, and I always tell people when I'm talking to them from an HR perspective, three customers, right? You have employees, and then you have managers, and then you have the C-suite. These three people have very different expectations from an HR perspective, right? Are you, your manager is thinking about how aligned you are to help him or her achieve their goals, right? And are you thinking about enabling or meeting their KRAs? How quickly can you get them the talent to do that, or how quickly can you make this process happen? And the third customer, which is the employee, how are we thinking about their experience, right? From an HR perspective. And when you think about an employee sort of life cycle, there are clearly some moments that matter more than others, right? How well entrenched are we from an HR function in those moments that matter to the employee? So the operations and governance is not just about numbers and graphs and charts. It's about thinking about a broad range of dimensions, right? In how they operate in your specific context, in your company. How are you thinking about it in the organization? And the fourth, which is really paramount, or the most interesting aspect of this is to be able to think about your vision. Right? The minute you say vision, people glaze over and they're like, "Aha, I see." Not really. Think about what are your investment plan for the next 3 years? Where do you see the organization going? Right? And when you think about it, the most successful organizations and most successful HR business functions are skating to where the puck is going to be, not where the puck is today, right? And that's the hard part, right? Where you're thinking about how is this going to be 3 years from now. One easy way that I always encourage our customers to think about is if you were to sort of rewind back 3 years, if you were to rewind back 5 years and sort of look at the organization where it was and where it is today, would you have made the same decisions in hindsight, right? And even if you can't really fast forward 3 years, it gives you perspective to start thinking about it. And therefore, the entire self-analysis is based on questions around these four broad categories, right? Or these four broad dimensions around your foundation, digital leverage, operations and governance, and your vision, your investment plans, right? And for the first three, there's a very discrete rating scale. And as we go through, I'll show you how that sort of looks. It's a number between 1 and 5, and you go from there. But when it comes to your investment plans, it's more a ranking, which is higher priority, which is lower, and so on. So we wanted to translate all of this sort of strategic consult talk into something that you can actually tangibly use, right? And let me show you how that actually looks. Let's take the tool for a spin. Right? This link, neeyamo.com/diagnose your future HR readiness, will be available in the Q&A section. So if you look at the answered questions or even up there in the current question, you'll be able to click on that tool. Click on it just yet. So when you click on it and you go in, you will see after you sign in a set of specific questions in each of the dimensions, right? So for example, around foundation, remember we spoke about data and then technology and then HR and quality and so on. Right? So this will ask you very specific questions and you can select an option. You can click which you think is the answer that you agree with the most, right? And as you go through each of these, the questions are fairly self-explanatory and sort of easy to understand, right? But they're very profound. And we've realized that simple is not easy. So to be able to simplify it, it took us some time to think through what really matters. How can we distill what we've learned into simple questions that we can ask, but that allows you to think about this very differently, right? So once you complete, as you go through these questions and you sort of complete those questions, then right away you will get a report. Okay? You'll actually get a document which will tell you where you stand, right, from the results perspective. Right? So it will allow you to sort of diagnose, if you will, from your score, right? and it is based on a cumulative score across the 4 dimensions. It will help place you in either basic, intermediate, emerging, or best in class. Right now, if you think about an organization's journey, this is typically how it goes, right? So from basic to intermediate to emerging and to best in class. Now, in some cases, when you start, you may be able to leapfrog from one to another, but that comes with its own flip sides and things like that. So if you think about incrementally expanding, a basic organization's got a very basic, soup and nuts kind of approach to HR. And you really need to think about getting some of the foundation parts right. The second are intermediary organizations, right, where you have a slightly advanced approach. You've got good building blocks. I mean, as one of my mentors would say, the bones are in there, right? You got the bones in the right place, and we got to put a little more flesh on it, right? So that would give you a lot of thought around how you can move it to emerging, right? So you've got very good foundation blocks. You've got a bunch of different things in place, and now you're pretty positioned to be able to take the leap to go to the next best in class, right? So when you get this report, it's actually pretty interesting to be able to read each of these dimensions, each of these ratings in a lot more detail, and gives you a lot of thought around how this actually works, right? And how you can think about it. So this is a very interesting perspective, in what I call a low stakes perspective, right? Once you take the survey and you get your results, you have a lot of food for thought around how to think about some of these key questions, right? And you will see through the report that while it will be rated, you will also get a spider chart, which will show you on a radar graph across the 4 key dimensions, right? Foundation, future vision, HR technology, ops, and governance. It sort of gives you a visual indication of where you're heavy on, right? And that gives you a great starting point um, to help you think about where you are from an organizational perspective. And that is really a very good starting point for your as is, right? So if you want to think about your as is situation, like Howard said, instead of trying to create complicated process maps and charts for everything you have, and creating reams of documents and spending a lot of money in the process, this is much better, because this allows you to think about your organization in a different perspective, and it gives you a clear rating, right? To help you, okay, here's where we are, and then think about how you can move this forward, right? So this is a very handy tool, and the link is available for you to click, and we would really love for each of you to be able to take this survey, so that you get a sense of how to actually play with this, right? So when you go to this URL, you will be able to open this, and once you take the questions and start thinking about it, then that puts you in a much better position for you to think about the business case. And is there one? And to one of the bigger questions of how do we overcome HR resistance, you can say, hey, look, in an Everest and Neeyamo study, here is where we are, here is where we need to go, here is the approach to get there. And that becomes a very good starting point. Okay? So with that, this was what we wanted to cover primarily from a session today, and encourage you to take the survey. And we have a few more minutes on the clock. Howard, would you like to talk through the diagnostic, or we can take a few more questions?
Now let's take a few more questions. I would vote for, yeah. And if we can't answer them here and now, we'll be in the speaker lounge, won't we?
Absolutely. It's a very interesting question. So, do you think a lack of tech savviness among HR leaders or teams is a roadblock to HR transformation? What do you think, Howard?
You might say a lack of people savviness amongst the IT community is equally a blockage. But if IT and if IT and HR can work together, or HR can find a way of unlocking a business business reality kind of insight from IT, that's great. I was speaking to an IT director, the CIO, and he said IT is about people, but I don't think he's in the majority. Anyway, I changed the question around. I think HR people have to be tech savvy, and if you think you're not, and it's always moving, yeah. If you think you're not, get out there and learn some stuff. But it's not the technology that solves the problem, because however powerful your technology, AI, cognitive, robotics, whatever, there has to be a business case, and it has to be implemented properly, and people have to want to use it. So so there's two things. Yeah, get tech savvy, invest in yourselves, or speak to your bosses and say, I need to get tech savvy. But even then, please don't fall into the trap that the technology is going to solve everything. For any change has to be multifaceted. You have to, many levers of change: people, process, organization, technology, commercial environment, and to some extent or other, you have to move them all in HR transformation. Far too many people, and many of them are are going to think, or going to tell you, oh, this technology is fantastic, it's going to solve all your problems. Not without moving the other levers. I'll say one final thing, Guhan. If we can imagine being in the cabin of a JCB, a digger, a big digging, earth moving machine, yeah, JCB's, or Caterpillar, yeah. Now that's got lots of levers in it. You're not going to be able to operate that digger properly just by moving one lever, the technology lever in this case, however hard you pull it, however often you pull it. So just a little kind of visual image there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if you're trying to move the earth, you need to know the equipment you're using, right? So, the interesting part about that question, lack of HR lack of tech savviness. You're absolutely right. A lot of consultants use what I call RDD. Have you heard of it? It's called resume-driven development. So they want you to use the newest technology so they can put it on their resume as saying, I've done that tech. So it's not the newest thing in tech is not what is going to solve the problem, right? It's important to think of technology as an enabler. It's a tool. Just like buying the same racket that Roger Federer uses is not going to make you a player like Roger Federer. It's going to probably help you, use your credit card better, but it's not going to change your game, right? Tech is a little bit like that. So you have to think about tech as a tool. It's an enabler, and it's a pretty cool enabler. It can look really cool, but you have to know what you're using. And to piggyback on Howard's analogy, you can buy the earth mover, but you need to know what levers to pull, right? So it's not about buying the earth mover, but about deciding that you want to move earth. That, I think, is the big decision. And then what tool you use is the easier choice to make. Okay, one quick question, Howard, and then we will move into the speaker lounge today.
Yeah.
What are the variables we need to factor while assessing future readiness?
Oh, I think that's what.
Sorry, what are the variables we need to factor while assessing future HR readiness?
You answered that one, Guhan, because you've just been speaking about future readiness in the tool, yeah, in the assessment tool.
So I think the four key factors that we spoke about, right, and the foundational elements ranging all the way down to your vision. The easiest way to sort of think about it is to take that survey. So you'll get the right questions, and there are no right answers to each question, or there's no wrong answer to a question, right? It's to help you start thinking about it, and that will give you the variables that you need in your organization, right? And no two organizations are the same. So it's important to be able to fit the context for what will fit for you as a business. It's not a boilerplate. It's not a template. Right? So I think that is probably the most important aspect of picking the right variables.
I think one key question that we can all put to ourselves right now is, well, two questions actually. Are we cognizant of the organization, the corporate strategy? Yeah, what the organization's trying to do, its challenges and its objectives? Hopefully the answer is yes, but there's no problem if not. Yeah, some organizations aren't great at spreading that. I would advocate find out, and the next question is, what are we for? What are we for in this context? We don't set the corporate strategy, we follow it. But what should that is the future readiness. Do you see what I mean? Because the corporate strategy presumably will have taken account of the corporation, of the organization's future. So in this context, what will we be for in the future? And that starts the whole process. But it's whatever your answer is for you, for your organization. So I'm speaking to the audience now. Yeah, in the context of what your organization is struggling with and what its strategic priorities are, what is HR for? And that is already future focused. Yeah.
Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks, Guhan. Thanks,
Thanks,
everyone.
Howard.